All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Sustaining Futures Community of Practice webinar. Today's topic is going to be on communicating for buy-in, and I'm excited and delighted to be joined by our dear colleague, Dr. Tony Salerno. I just want to run through some short logistics for today. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with these by now, but in case you're joining us for your first Sustaining Futures webinar, I thought I'd run through some things. So today's webinar is being recorded. We are going to circulate the recording of the webinar, the slides we're going to walk through, and some of the supplementary resources we're going to talk about today after the webinar. So if you're looking for some materials on what we talk about today, we will get this out to you early next week. And we would encourage you to share the information from today's webinar with your Sustaining Futures core implementation team members in case they were not able to join for the live webinar today. The other thing I wanted to say is that as we've done in past webinars, we've built in significant time for questions. So we want to encourage you throughout the duration of the webinar, if you have questions, please use the chat box, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen, to chat in some questions. We'll be collecting them and then looking through all the questions we've collected and answering them at the end of the webinar. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure meeting a lot of you over the past couple weeks and months of our in-person trainings. And now I'm going to pass along to my colleague, Dr. Tony Salerno, to talk us through the content today.
All right, thanks so much, Megan. Welcome everyone to this webinar. We're going to cover two areas today. One has to do with communicating for buy-in, which is something that most everyone who forms a team and wants to make some improvements within an organization, that's one of their first tasks, right, is to communicate to one or more stakeholders in the organization around what you're doing, why it's important. That's a very, very common first step. So we want to make sure that we gave you an opportunity to really think carefully about how do you go about communicating and presenting so that you both raise the awareness of others who really matter in supporting your efforts and also to engage them in supporting this, over time. The other part of today's webinar is really based on some of the really very gratifying conversations that we've had with some of the individual consultation calls and really hearing from teams regarding the kinds of things that they're thinking about, things that they're doing, steps that they've already taken, plans that they're developing, which has been really very gratifying to us in terms of the thoughtfulness that we've heard from all the teams that we've been in contact with and some of the thoughtful steps that they've taken, they put into place. And their strategy is also to engage others in understanding what this is all about and why it's really important, for others. So I'm going to talk about what we've learned from all of you regarding some of your initial goal setting. I want to talk a little bit further about that. Those are, I think, two areas that are very important at this stage in your efforts to implement some of those principles and practices associated with trauma and resiliency. So let's get started here. So the first thing is around how to communicate, for buy-in, and this is really drawn from the literature on implementation science, on persuasion, and how to engage and involve others in supporting an initiative. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And as I mentioned, there's two parts of the agenda, communicating for buy-in and really setting practical goals. So this particular grid here gives you an overview of some of the important steps that you need to consider whenever you're in a position to communicate to others about trauma, about resilience, and why you're actually doing this and why it's important. So the first task is to think about who it is that you're trying to influence, right? What is it, faculty and staff? Is it the students directly? Is it leadership and administrators? Or are there elements in the community, people in the community at large, that you want to communicate, to both raise their awareness and to have them see the benefits of moving in this direction and in what way they can be supportive? So that's, and a lot of your message and who's going to be the messenger and the venue, expected outcomes, a lot of it will be based upon your selection of the shareholder. And then, of course, there's the message, and we'll talk a little bit more about, how to ensure that you've identified the critical points that you want to make, and also the materials that you want to use, right? And then who's the messenger? And many times the messenger is as important as the message. The venue, of course, the expected outcome, like what is it you really want to accomplish when you're engaging others in a process of both educating and engaging them to be supportive. And then is it a single type of event, or are there follow-up activities associated with it? So let's start with the stakeholders, faculty and staff, students, leadership, and community at large. And the one thing to keep in mind, no matter who it is that you're going to be presenting to or want to influence or communicating with, is to take into account the current knowledge that they may or may not have. So oftentimes you might start out with just sort of assessing that, right, asking folks about what they've already heard about it. And that's important because it helps you to correct any misconceptions that they may have. And also whether or not folks have already been exposed to this, which already gives you a sense of how much you need to provide people with some background and definitions related to what it is and why it's important. Then why does this audience care? What's on the mind of an audience? That's like one of the most critical factors that folks who have looked at influencing strategies, persuasive strategies, is, what does the audience really care about? What's their experience? What perspective are they coming from? And then are there any risks that the audience is concerned about? When you're presenting around trauma-informed care, I'll say a little bit more about this a little later on, is that if it involves people that may need to change some of the things that they're currently doing, that's in and of itself is sort of a risk. And to kind of understand that, what's the implications of the information you're providing to the audience? What are the various roles of the audience? And are there prevailing attitudes and beliefs? I was listening to some of you and meeting with you both in California and on the calls. Some folks had some concerns around, the community at large, whether it's a very conservative community where their prevailing views or attitudes may be more of the view and role of prisons as a form of punishment, right, and deterrence. And that kind of prevailing belief or attitude will shape, and if you're trying to influence individuals with a particular bias or perspective on the role of prisons, then you need to kind of acknowledge that and shape your message to address it. So the first thing is thinking about who it is that you're going to be communicating with. And then the message, right? Why you communicate. Is it primarily educational? Do you simply want to ensure that whoever the stakeholder is, right, whether it's leadership or faculty and staff, or whether it's students or it's people in the college, whoever the audience might be, including community members of the public, are we just trying to develop knowledge here and awareness? And then, of course, what you're doing is some very basic foundational information. Are you trying to motivate folks to join your efforts? Would they potentially have a role in supporting you? And that's, in a way, kind of thinking we're just trying to gain more recruits, basically. We want other folks to kind of join us in this process. Are you looking to change people's behavior, not just their attitudes, but also their behavior? You have to move beyond knowledge to actually providing people with some skills related to implementing things a little differently. Or do you want to just kind of set the stage? We just want folks to come away from this presentation saying, hey, this is a really good idea. I'm glad that this is going on in the prisons. And there are going to be other things that are going to be going on. These folks are continuing to work on improving the outcomes, and we're going to be much more receptive to their future efforts. So basically, it's what is the message, why it's important, and the notion is that they come away thinking, gee, this is a good idea, and especially if I have something to do with this. I can be supportive of this effort. I know what it is. I think it's important. It can be done, and I play a role in supporting it. Then there's the structure and the content, really, of the message. And in many ways, it's presenting, raising basic awareness around what is trauma-informed care and resiliency building principles and practice the basics. One of the things that we are going to be sharing with you is basically the ABCs of trauma and resilience as it applies to educational settings. So these are going to be a set of PowerPoint slides that will be available to all of you that you may pick and choose or do the entire thing in your efforts to present. If you're doing a formal presentation, that would involve some PowerPoint, slide deck of some sort. Then why is this so important? How does it benefit? That's a very important question to whatever audience you have, is to ask yourself, well, why should this audience give a hoot about this? Why should they care? Why should students, if we were talking to the act directly to students, why is this important? What does this have to do with them? For faculty and staff, why is this important? What does it have to do with them? The program itself and the community at large or others in the college, that is a very important question in thinking about the benefits. We've concluded in the slide deck that we share with you that we thought about what the potential benefits are, and you may want to add to it. We don't develop the tools that you say, okay, do it this way, and this is the only way. We give you a good starting point, and then you can kind of add and delete as you see fit based on your knowledge of the particular audience and the context that you're in. What's the downside of not exploring this? So people might ask you, and this is to leadership or any group that you're communicating with, is, so what's the point? What if we don't do this? Why should we bother? Really thinking about what's the downside of not exploring the benefits of trauma-informed approaches and resiliency building kind of a framework. Right? Do we risk anything if we don't move in this particular area? And oftentimes it has to do with you can get very, very stuck. You may not achieve the mission, achieve the kinds of outcomes that you want from introducing educational programs both inside and outside the prison environment. And then in many ways, being able to share and identify the things that are already taking place that align very nicely with trauma-informed approaches and resiliency-building approaches. So that's what you kind of keep doing. But then also being able to identify the kinds of things that maybe one ought to really reduce or stop doing, and then things that we're not currently doing that we begin to plan to do, that we start doing. And if we adopt a trauma-informed resiliency-building approach. So in just thinking about the structure and the content of the message designed to be able to promote buy-in. Also, involve and engage stakeholders to share their reactions, concerns. This is not simply sit there and listen to us passively give you information. You want to elicit people's thoughts about it, their comments, their reactions, their concerns, questions, ideas that they have, so that an audience feels that they're engaged in this process. It also gives you an idea of whether or not you're, in fact, communicating for buy-in. Are you getting buy-in from folks? Are they seeing it in a positive way? Addressing concerns related to the impact of taking this kind of an approach on personal control status and personal meaning. That is really big. Any audience, if they perceive that one of the things you want them to do is to do things differently, any change in what they actually do day to day, the initial response of an audience is, okay, does this mean I'm going to lose some control? I mean, you're going to want me to do things that I currently don't do, and do I have to not do some of the things that I currently do? That's a control issue. Is there going to be any change in the status? Usually that's not going to be the case, but that is a concern that folks have when there is significant change. And then personal meaning, right? Am I going to have to stop doing things that I really enjoy doing, or start doing things that I'm not so crazy about? So those are very common things and nothing unusual about it. And oftentimes the message is just reassuring folks, right, that this is something that enhances their work. It's something that will enhance personal meaning, something that actually provides them with greater control. And it's just making that point, because that's a very common initial response of any group who believes that your communication is designed to engage them in changing something. And then the other piece is emphasizing the supports, resources, and tools that are available, right, to be able to bring some of these principles and practices into the organization. And the reason why that is is important is, folks are concerned about a number of things. One is this may be positive, right? They can say, look, I think this is really cool stuff. Yeah, you're right? People in prisons have gone through a lot of adversity in their lives. Yeah, you're right. For faculty and staff, they often have, it has an impact, an emotional impact, working in a prison environment and working with individuals who've had significant traumatic life events, right? And so people say, yeah, that's very, very important that we address this, but sometimes people don't see it as possible. And that's very important for buy-in, right? The buy-in is promoted when a person says, okay, I get what you're saying. I think this is really important. But the next step is it really possible for us to do this in a way that's practical? And that's where you're emphasizing the supports, the resources, and the tools is going to be very, very helpful in promoting buy-in in that regard. So I want you to kind of consider this for just a moment. This is sort of a little homework for you guys, and I'd like you to just think about this in the next minute or two. I want you to think about your elevator speech, that a colleague, someone, right? It could be a colleague, anyone else who you might meet on an elevator. You're going to the 12th floor, so you got 12 floors to go. And you have 1 minute or less to get to the 12th floor. And you want to answer the following question, which in many ways is sort of like an elevator speech. So just imagine I got on the elevator with you. And I said, hey, I saw that email about something had to do with this trauma-informed thing or this resiliency stuff in the prison programs. What's up with that? And I want you to just think about and type into the chat box, what main point, what main message would you like to communicate to me as we get and move towards the 12th floor? What do you think is one of the most important things that you would want me to know if I questioned you or inquired about what are you guys up to with this trauma-informed and resiliency stuff? So I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to think about it, and I'd like you to just put in what your main point, most important idea that you would like to communicate to me before we get to the 12th floor. So Meg or Tara, I guess I'm going to rely on you to, let's see, I'm not sure if I can see the chat box here. Let's see. Okay. So I'd like people to just type into the chat box. Okay, great. Thank you. Great. Things are coming in. So one message is we are helping people overcome their past circumstances and choices and improve their lives. Thank you so much. That's from Charmaine. Appreciate that. So that sounds like that's what you want to communicate to me. You certainly could do that within getting to the first 12th floor. Okay, just let's give it a couple of minutes and see if other folks would chime in as well. And we'd like to hear, yeah, great. From James, thanks, James. I am glad you were paying attention. What was your initial reaction to the trauma-informed resiliency? Okay, so that idea is the person has heard something about it, and you want to just you want to first see what their thoughts, what their takeaway was. Very good. Gabriel, how can I recognize when an incarcerated student is experiencing trauma? Thank you. Other things you'd want to make sure you communicate. So one is that I can recognize this is what we're doing is trying to understand really our students and if they're experiencing traumatic and really the consequences of adversity in their lives. I'd really love to hear from everyone. What's the main point you want to communicate to me? Okay. So Eduardo is saying, this is what he would say to me. We're on the first floor. He says, we're educating people about what trauma is and how it affects students and instructors in an academic setting. Terrific. Just maybe hear one more. Okay, let me go on. If folks begin to add, then we'll be able to share that as well. Okay, let's see from Roy. What you want to communicate is that, look, this trauma is real, and we really need to learn how to deal with it. Stephanie, we're trying to help faculty and staff gain a perspective to better serve their students. Perfect. Great. These are terrific. And what's important about this is to really think about when you're encountering other people, how you might describe to them in a succinct way what this is and why it's important. So from Patrice, my feedback to all faculty and staff that it isn't just the students who are incarcerated. The students in our class all have trauma-related issues, and this knowledge will help all of us. So that's the other important idea, that this isn't just directed towards the students. This is directed towards everyone, to all humans that are involved in this work. It's terrific. Thank you so much, everyone. And one of the reasons why this is important, sometimes we can influence and communicate for buy-in. You could be in a very formal setting, and somebody could sit there for an hour, and they might see statistics, and they may hear some human stories, very, very important and really powerful. But for many people, when they hear from a respected colleague who they perceive as someone who has a lived experience of being in prisons and working in this area, what's so important is your sharing this information can have as much impact and influence on a colleague while you're in an elevator or you're on a lunch line or you're just chatting somewhere together or having a beer somewhere, is that you're sharing your perspective on what trauma-informed is and resiliency and why this is important can have a huge influence on the person's receptivity to that idea and to not sell that short. And thinking about your elevator speech can be very helpful in making that happen. Terrific. And I see other folks are still chiming in as well. I'd like to give them acknowledgement. Lots of people are leaving prison. If trauma is not addressed, they are more likely to return, but hurt others in the process. All right, I can see you guys are really very, very thoughtful about this, and you got it terrific. Thank you so much. Let's go on to the next slide. And then the ideas of what we at NYU are going to be providing all of you. Well, one of the things that I mentioned to you is PowerPoint slides on the basics of trauma, on how trauma applies to learning and a prison population. We're now working, as part of our conversations with all of you, so many of you shared with us that one of the most powerful sources of messaging that really engaged you and inspired you and strengthened your recognition of the importance of in creating these healing environments within a prison environment is hearing from Dr. James and part of his sort of lived experience. So one of the things we're working on, this is not really part of our initial, agreement with Sustaining Futures, but we think it's an important thing, so we're working on that. We're working on putting together a video of Dr. James that we can then share with you, that you can then use in your effort to really highlight the importance of this work. And hearing from someone for whom this is not theoretical or academic, but has had a lived experience and the impact that it's had on Dr. James' life. For many of you, what we've heard from is that was extremely important and inspiring. So we're working on that, and we think that would be another resource that you can use. The ACEs questionnaire is just another, if we want to communicate to folks what do we mean by these critical experiences of adversity. You have my not-so-famous resiliency measure, if it's something that you might find an opportunity to use that. And then there's a staff training evaluation survey. I'm gonna bring that up right now. I have to, I'm going to share my screen. And I want to give you an example. It's just another, okay. Let's see. Someone can tell me, is everyone seeing this? Meg or Tara, I just want to check to see if you guys can see it. Okay. So some of you, whenever you're doing a presentation, this has to do with when you're giving more of a formal presentation. is to ask yourself, okay, so did we have the impact that we hoped to have, we wanted to have? And here's a tool that you can use or make changes to or modify, add, delete. We are very non-prescriptive in that regard. But let me share with you one way, a set of items that you can ask, some questions, to give you a sense of whether or not you influence the audience in the way you want it. Did they buy in? Right. So here's some examples. It's basically from strongly disagree to strongly agree, from 1 to 5. And questions like, I learned important information, right? So that's just looking at, did the group understand what we were talking about? Do they believe that job satisfaction will increase as an organization, as the program becomes more trauma-informed? Do they believe our program is very supportive of becoming more trauma-informed and resilient? Is there support for this to happen? Will I play an important role in implementing this? Is it important for me in my job? Is this really relevant? Who cares? Why should I care about this? I'd love to learn more about this, right? That means you've kind of inspired people, right? You've activated them to want to learn more. Some might want to learn a high level of competency. They just don't want a background. They really want to get to the point where they have a high level of competency. Program has what it takes to become trauma-informed. I think learning more about this will make me more successful. And you can see more. I would recommend this to my colleagues. And how much did you know beforehand? And when it comes to understanding this approach, I found this presentation either, quite difficult to understand to very clear and understandable. And then was this a good decision? The fact that we even have such a thing of sustaining futures, that we even have such a thing as a community of practice, and the fact that we're looking at trauma and resilience, is this everywhere from a bad idea to a great idea? And then if you actually wanted to score it, you can actually score it. And if you added up all the scores of the various people who would give you feedback, you can add up those scores, and it gives you some indication of whether or not you had an unsatisfactory type of outcome. It means that your people did not buy in, or they got to buy in a generally good way, and then they really bought in. So again, we don't prescribe this, but we offer it to you as another resource that you may use in order to get some feedback and some information regarding whether or not you were as successful in communicating to buy-in as you were hoping. But let me stay here. Okay, let me get. All right. Okay, sharing screen. Stop sharing the screen. Okay, got it. All righty. I can't believe I actually did that.
Looks great, Tony. Looks.
Are we back? We back to?
Yep. All good.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. I'm very surprised. But anyway, great. So what kind of a message, as we sort of mentioned, is that the basics. So people need a background information of what this is, why it's important, the benefits to everyone, how understanding trauma applies to learning in a prison population. So really the mission of the education program. What is resilience, why it matters, how trauma-informed resilient prison applies to the experience of faculty and staff, and that is really broadening the idea that everyone is part of this. We're trying to create environments that are enhancing to all the people who are involved, including the staff and the faculty, and how we in each of our roles can promote this. That's a really important piece. So you can have somebody who's like listening to you, and they may say, this is great, glad that the organization is doing this, but it doesn't have anything to do with me. The thing is to try to create a bridge so that this is the way in which you support this mission. You support this vision of moving in this direction. Very important part of the message. So as I already mentioned this about the learned lessons from implementation science, because, you say, why wouldn't somebody buy into this, right? Come on now. Isn't it sort of like obvious that this is a good thing? And as I mentioned to you, is people need to be reassured that by moving in this direction, it's not going to threaten their sense of control. Or if it does, people have to have a conversation if they have a perception that it's going to result in control over their work life. That was bullet 2 there. unwanted demands on time, energy, and autonomy. And really the message is that this is to increase your sense of control, which is your sense of satisfaction, of achieving your outcomes, of feeling more accomplished. That's what it's all about, right? Rather than just putting more demands on an individual who already may feel that they're putting all their time and energy into what they're currently doing. It's not about doing more things. It's more about doing things differently than you're already doing. And then the meaning, it typically would not be affected really by this or the status in an organization, but people do need to be reassured about that. And that's particularly for faculty and staff who would be more directly involved in promoting trauma-informed and resiliency approaches. The other people is that these are some of the things that we've kind of like learned from implementation, that people change what they do less because they're given analysis that shifts their thinking than because they are shown a truth that influences their feelings. So really affecting a person's emotional experience, their viscera, so to speak, right? The visceral reaction, the emotional reaction. And that's one of the things that's so powerful and why we're going to put some time and effort and resource into creating a video with Dr. James, because that is really a shift around a person's kind of being emotionally touched by an important and critical life story. And so the human story, if there's ever an opportunity to engage and involve a student who perhaps, left the prison and now part of the community college outside of prison life, and they're in a position to kind of articulate the meaning and the purpose of all of this, that's pretty powerful. Sometimes you can do that, and sometimes you can't do that. So basically a combination of information, data, and the human story behind this, directly or indirectly, can often be very powerful. The messenger, really thinking about who, right? What status do they have in the organization? Do they have authority? Do they have credibility? Are they viewed as an influencer? There are people who are natural influencers. People look to them. Sometimes you call them thought leaders. But sometimes they have formal leadership and sometimes they don't. That's one thing you find in a lot of research in looking at, what influences people's attitudes and behavior. And oftentimes in organization, there are individuals who, because of their particular position or because of their history, their experience, or their ability to establish strong connections, social connections with others, are really looked to, even if they're not in a formal leadership role. So really thinking about who has credibility, who can be an influencer, looking at whether or not gender kinds of issues or race or region needs to be taken into consideration as well. And then will the audience identify with the presenter, meaning that the presenter is going to be sharing their experience, and that experience is not going to be so dissimilar, from the audience. It's just something to take into consideration. Sometimes it's a single message, or sometimes it's a team of messengers. The experience of the presenter, how in terms of their comfort with communication, articulation, and their engagement style, and then whether or not you're going to really have just an individual present or do a team presentation. And then the venue, of course, the size of the audience, how long is the initial communication, what is the optimal timing, duration of the training, what venue works best, face-to-face or a webinar, and then a comfortable setting that is free from distractions. So what you've gotten here is really the best practices associated with communicating for buy-in. Now, I know it sounds like it's a lot, right? Perhaps initially you said, well, what's the big deal? We just kind of, have a set of PowerPoint slides or some handouts and we kind of talk to folks. But what we do find is that one wants to be very systematically and thoughtfully effective in communicating, that going through this process, right, thinking about these various steps and just taking them into account so that when you do finally decide on how you're going to communicate for buy-in, that you've given yourself the best chances of influencing whatever stakeholder or audience is the focus of your efforts. And then assessing impact, and I already shared with you one possibility, which is a formal kind of feedback survey that you can then collect, or you can ask as part of the presentation, checking in with people, how do they think about this, what are the questions, those sorts of things. Also, your observation and of the audience itself. You can often tell whether folks are kind of with you or they've kind of like tuned out. Or you can have surveys conducted at various points in time if you're doing a much larger kind of like presentation. Or you may find yourself be able to chat with some individuals in the audience in a way that's safe and that you can get some feedback, with someone you may know and say, I just wanted to check with you and what you thought about this and those sorts of things. Or sometimes you have follow-up kind of like focus group. Whatever seems practical for you that would still giving you some meaningful feedback. Or a single event, or this is just one event in a series. Were these going to be regular occurring forums and meetings or just a single? And so if it's single, then you got to kind of get your whole point in, right? You got to go from beginning, middle, and sort of end. If you anticipate ongoing kinds of meetings, then you kind of think about, okay, what's going to be the follow-up for let's say, the subsequent kind of communication. Okay, so that's the area of like buy-in. Let me just wait and see if anyone have any questions that you want to chat in about this section on buy-in. Just give folks a moment. Have any questions? Okay. Well, I will interpret this as that Dr. Salerno did such a fantastic job of explaining this that we don't have any questions. Every question has sort of been answered by this. If you do think of some questions later on, please, chat that into us, send us an email. We'll be happy to respond. So now I just want to go to what's an important piece that during our face-to-face, we weren't able to really get into this. And maybe the timing, now is really the best timing around it, is deciding what you'll do in a meaningful and practical way. And this is what we've learned from just having some of those individual calls. So we're really thinking in some ways around modest, small steps matter, especially with limited time. There isn't like a lot of time for this community of practice. And some of you may have some challenges like in the summertime, and you're concerned about that. So we just want to reassure you that developing modest and meaningful steps is really a way to go. And that means meaningful just means that you would perceive that this is add value to the mission of the educational program that's related to enhancing student performance and faculty and staff success and satisfaction. Also the idea of being able to, that it could be visible, right? That you would sort of like know and be able to explain to others what you were able to, accomplish. It wouldn't be like sort of a secret, right? That you can actually point to it. Sometimes you're literally pointing to a document, or you're pointing to a training that occurred, or an activity that took place, so that it's visible. And the other is that it's likely to stick, right? That it's likely to stick. It's the kind of thing that was so practical, that really met the felt need of folks, that it's likely for it to continue. Or it'll build on that, and you can build on some additional steps. So that's what I mean by meaningful. So a modest and meaningful goal, for example, an information dissemination focus, right, to promote buy-in. This is just an example that a team will design, present, and evaluate the impact of an educational awareness-building activity to specific members of the workforce, leadership, or community entities. That's just what we've been talking about. So that is a perfectly modest and meaningful goal to have in mind. That our first step within the time frames of this community of practice, that we will do that. So we'll be able to answer that question and get the feedback. Another one, we will disseminate information about educational best practices to faculty and staff. For example, we might design an instructor's guide that incorporates educational best practices based on the information presented during our kickoff, your own research, and your own expertise. Now that's maybe a little bit more than modest, right? Or at least getting to develop an outline around that, or put together the right team who is going to put together, an instructor's guide, especially for like new faculty, but even for existing faculty, to kind of provide some guidance on some of the thorny issues that you guys shared with us very, very often when we were meeting in California around the issues of professional boundaries, ways in which to kind of, organize or provide some of the grounding types of like strategies that folks may have available to them. and then many, many other things. You guys had so many terrific ideas related to educational strategies in order to create a receptive environment for learners, how to organize materials, how to build on strengths. So you guys had a lot of thoughts about that. So this could be an example of what a team might want to do. Sometimes the approach is information gathering focused. Well, what we're going to do is we need to just select, gather, and organize information about a problem or need that's experienced by our students or faculty or staff. We'll use that information to make informed decision about next steps. The information may be gathered through a variety of means, including formal surveys, focus groups, interviews, meetings. Some folks are interested in kind of getting a better handle on the experience of the workforce with respect to, that area of compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, or burnout, those kinds of things. And there are tools that we shared with you that can help you to do that. So that's an information gathering focus. You see, that's what we want to know. We want to be able to diagnose and have a better understanding of the nature of a particular problem. And we have a systematic strategy in place to gather that information. It's modest, but meaningful. Looking at policy, procedures, and practice, perhaps one of the other things is to take a hard look at current policies, procedures, and practices, right, and to decide to what degree they are aligned with the principles and practices of trauma-informed resiliency building approaches. And there the idea is a policy review, practice review, and then coming up with a recommendation of some practical strategies to address some of those things, whether it's tweaking policies or adding policy, adding some new procedures or practices, could be another task that a team could take on. Again, example of a modest and meaningful goal. Sometimes it would have to do with, we're going to develop a comprehensive plan, right, that's going to go much further than, or at least further than the community of practice, right, short-term, long-term kinds of goals. And it would create this, and it's designed to accomplish a meaningful goal related to the implementation of trauma-informed policies, procedures, practice. And the plan is shared with and endorsed by leadership, faculty, and staff. So that's where a group comes together. It's kind of like a think tank and says, we're going to develop a plan. We have a vision, and we have these various steps. We have these time frames, and we're going to develop it in such a way and then engage leadership and others who are going to be instrumental in supporting that particular plan. That's a meaningful and practical goal. For some, you select, implement, and evaluate a change, something that you actually want to do differently, and that's measurable and reflects one or more of the principles of trauma-informed resiliency building approaches. There, it's like an implementation. You have an actual action step that you want to introduce. An example could be, okay, we're going to start out every initial classroom with a 1 or 2 or 3 different grounding kinds of like exercises, and we're going to see to what degree that was really helpful to the students, right? Get some of their feedback on whether or not that was helpful. That's just I'm just sort of like making that up as an example of a specific change process that you wanted to implement. Or you're going to introduce a new strength evaluation. You have like some kind of a survey that you want to give students. And there you're looking to elicit the kinds of strength they have around like interests or talents or skills. You say, well, that's a change, right? We're going to engage in an assessment of our students' strength areas. That's just another example. Really, there are many, many examples of things that any team could do that would be related to making an actual specific implementation of a change. Creating a concrete resource is another meaningful and practical goal. I already mentioned a little bit about that. A resource that will be helpful to either students or faculty or the public or to the larger school community that aligns with these principles and practices. Faculty handbook, right, for professionals. Online orientation module for new hires. A PR campaign to promote benefits of prison-based education to the community. These, again, are just examples. These are not things, some of you may say, might be find this practical and useful and others not. The important thing is just to get an idea that you can have some of these meaningful and practical types of goals. strengthening social connection. We've heard that from some of the teams, that one of the observations, and that they find there's a felt need for, is for faculty and staff to spend more time communicating with each other. It's almost an internal support, all based on building resilience, all focused on social support as a factor that strengthens resilience. And for faculty and staff, certainly that can be an area that folks can have expressed some interest in and want to move forward. That's meaningful and practical, and I'm again modest. All depends, right? The important thing is really that it's meaningful, right? Anyway, so that's another example. So we have a poll question here that we just want to get a little bit of a sense of what type of improvement area have you identified as the focus of your efforts. Is it related to any of the things I just shared with you? A would mean, yeah, we're really focusing on education, disseminating information to promote buy-in. Then you would check A. B is, no, we're going to be focusing a lot on gathering information, assessing the felt need, the concerns, the challenges of students, faculty, staff, a leadership community. We're in that. That's one of our important steps. Strengthening social connections, creating a concrete resource, review of existing policies and practices, implementing a specific change, developing a short-term comprehensive plan that goes beyond the community of practice. Or you say, Tony, none of these things. We're really thinking about other stuff. So if any of these have already been identified, please check it. If none of those align with what you're thinking of doing or started to do, please just chat that into the chat box. So just give you a moment to do that. And Tara, you just let me know when we'll be able to calculate that.
Sure. We're waiting for some more participants to answer.
Okay, good. So I might be chatting typing in the chat box.
We have the poll open. We can keep it open we have about 50% completed it.
Well, we'd really love to hear from everyone. And if it's only 50% that meet these particular examples, and then are folks chatting? Tara, can you tell if folks are chatting?
Not yet.
Okay. I'll just give it another 10 seconds. I want to hear from as many of you as we can. Okay. Let's see what we have. Tara, will I be able to see it, or is it something you'll be able to see?
Sorry, I was having some WebEx difficulties. You should be able to see the results now.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, look at this. We have folks across this. We have 6 folks who are really looking at the information dissemination, 3 that are looking at the gathering information, 1 that's really big on the strengthening social connections, creating a concrete resource. Wow, that is really interesting. Some are reviewing existing policies, some implementing a specific approach, developing a short and long-term comprehensive plan, 3 out of 20. That is really, really fantastic. What's so nice about this is the variation that we have. And what that tells me is that folks are really zeroing in on those areas that are particularly important to them, that aligns with their reality. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tara, for helping us with that. Let me go to the next slide. Okay, so we have some minutes for any questions that folks want to type in.
So, Tony, can you hear me? This is Meg.
Yes.
So I actually, one question came in, and I was wondering if you could walk us through this. So I think we're wondering, with this particular topic area, does this tie in specifically with any one of those goal areas from the organizational decision guide that all of our college teams participated and filled out?
Yes. But it can cut across those various things.
Okay.
So someone would say, look, I'm going to try to gather information related to, let's say, the workforce issues around, trauma, around burnout, around vicarious trauma, or they can be gathering information related to the kinds of practices that you have educationally, or they'll be gathering information related to the current knowledge of the workforce. So it can cut across any of those particular goal areas, and then some of these, some might actually cut across all three. So for some organizations might be saying, we're going to create a resource or a guide or a handbook. Let's say somebody selected, a team is wanting to move in that area. They may actually want to address all those three goals within that guidebook. So it's not, what I'm trying to do here is to broaden the range of activities and strategies that folks may employ. And some would be specific to a particular goal. Some will cut across all goals. And so it's, I think that's the best way of kind of like conceptualizing it. That makes sense?
I think that really helps, Tony. Yeah, thank you so much. And so as we wait for a couple more questions to come in, I want to acknowledge that there were some questions and thoughts that came in that weren't necessarily directly tied in with the topic that we're discussing today. So I want to just acknowledge you folks who chatted those in, because that's really great feedback and we appreciate it. For those, just so you know, they might be topics that come up on future webinars around resources and best practices and principles and whatnot. But I think because we have about a minute left, I just want to see if we have any questions specifically related to the webinar we're on today. But again, want to acknowledge, especially thanks to the Norco team, got your questions, and we'll try and address those on a future webinar. Any other questions?
So, anybody type in a question?
So as we wait for the last question to come in, I'm just going to say, I know there was a question about all of these resources and materials that we're developing and all the trainings that we're pulling together. And as Kelly has shared before, and what we're really excited about as the NYU team, is that we are going to be pulling together everything that we create for this project in a final toolkit. So yes, you will have access to all of these webinars, the slides, the tools, the resources. We're going to pull everything together at the end of the project in one final toolkit so that you'll be able to access and utilize this information going forward. So thank you for that question. It's a helpful reminder.
Great. Okay, I know we're at 2 p.m.
Yep.
And people are pretty busy. So if other questions come up, people can always, kind of share that with us. But we hope that you found this helpful in your considering any strategies around communicating for buy-in. And I think another question came in around some of the resources. So how can people access, let's say, the PowerPoint slides or any other resource that we have? How would they do it right now?
So after each webinar, we circulate the slides and the recording. And the recording, I believe, gets posted on the Corrections to College webpage. Kelly, am I correct about that? I think there's a specific page that the recordings are posted to.
Yeah, it'll be on our YouTube page, which will also make that link available to everyone.
Great. And the set of PowerPoint slides or other resources that we keep adding, how do people access that?
So we circulate those by email, and I think the goal is at the end of this project, we're going to pull everything that we've developed together into one toolkit. And location TBD. We'll let you know where that's going to be.
Great. All right, I just want to thank everyone. We've really enjoyed so much working with all of you, having our individual consultation calls. We're so excited to come back later in the year. For our summit, and so appreciative of all the thoughtful and enthusiastic responses and your engagement in this process. Look forward to our next webinar and our future individual consultation calls. Stay well, everyone. Bye-bye now.